The content presented in this podcast and YouTube show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health or a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this show. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of this show are not responsible for any adverse effects resulting from your use of or reliance on any information presented.
Andrea, can you hear us?
Many years ago, I died for 26 seconds. There are so many people in this world that have experienced life events that have led to their soul purpose. Wake Up Your Soul with Andrea will bring you these significant life events that demonstrate how to use those moments for guidance and life purpose. These are our stories. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wake Up Your Soul with Andrea Lynn. Today's guest is a very, very special guest. I'm very excited. We were just chatting, and his life experiences are similar to mine, but so amazing because we will take away so much from listening to this man. So he has started a few companies and he's had a heart transplant, but I'm actually going to have him start off by sharing the secret of life. Let's welcome Jay Waddell. Hi, Jay. How are you?
Hi, Andrew. I'm doing great. I've known you for 18 minutes, and it feels like we go back a long ways.
I know, the same. There's that soul connection sometimes that we have with people when we meet them, and I think that happens when you're in the right place at the right time, right? Like it's a very meant to be thing. So you and I are definitely meant to be talking today and sharing this story with everybody. Can you go ahead and start with sharing what is the secret to life? Share with us the story about how you came to getting this answer.
Sure, I'd love to. It happened 35 some years ago, but it sticks in my mind like it happened yesterday. I was in a consulting business. I had a client in the travel industry, and one of the perks was I had to do research. And my research was a free trip to Australia and New Zealand for 3 weeks on a group tour with a company, with my client's company, and to understand why people travel the world, even when they get older and it's tough physically. Why do they feel compelled to travel the world and go through that effort? And so one of my fellow travelers I was getting to know well was an 85-year-old clinical psychologist who had been a World War II bomber pilot. And he wanted to help his fellow bomber pilots who felt guilt from bombing cities in Germany. And so he opened a practice to help those people. And he and I got along so well. And I knew he was a sage and a guru that I might hardly ever encounter in my life. And so I said, Bob, would you do me a huge favor? Would you answer one question for me? Would you answer? And he goes, what's that question? And I said, what is the secret of life? And I said, we've got some travel coming up. In 3 days, we'll be in Sydney and we're going out for a group dinner. How about we don't talk for 3 days? Because we'd been talking morning to night every day on the trip. And he goes, okay, I can do that. And so for 3 days, we're on this bus. We're taking all these trips and events together. And we didn't talk, but he's smiling and smirking. And we get to Sydney and we get to dinner. And this 85-year-old clinical psychologist, Bob, is exploding with enthusiasm as we get to dinner. And we order and he says, I've got the answer. And I go, what is it? What is the secret of life, Bob? And he says, evolution. It's one word, evolution. You need to consider that you are a work in process and that you are constantly seeking more learning and more experiences, meeting more people, going more places, so that you keep enhancing your perspective of the world. And he said, so think of yourself as a work in process. And that was 35 plus years. I have never forgotten that. And so for me, that's been a secret of life that's helped me.
I can see how that can also lead people to living in this more positive state as well, because then everything that comes your way, you can just look at it as like, okay, this is just part of the process. I need to learn how to navigate this instead of getting angry with any of the things that are rough and difficult. So I think that's a really beautiful way to put it.
It is. And jumping forward a little, one of the things that struck me is I had a pretty easy life for quite a few years, and things happened with good fortune for me. And then harder stuff came.
You want to start with telling us about how you started a few companies and how you were successful with that?
Yeah, I'll move quickly. I grew up in a tiny town of 600 people on a farm in rural Wisconsin with my brothers and sister and parents. It was great. We worked hard. I learned you get up and you get stuff done. And so that served me well. And I found I was pretty good in business, got a graduate degree, got with a big medical company in Madison, Wisconsin. And they said, hey, would you like to go overseas? But my wife at the time just finished grad school and had a great job offer. And I thought, why in the world would I take a job that serves me well, but we're talking 40 years ago, and that would not serve my wife well. And I want to be with her the rest of my life. And so I don't want to make her be the trailing spouse and give up a career, because it was hard to find one
Right.
for a female, much more so 40 years ago. And so on the day before I needed to decide on the job in London, I said, hey, I forgot to tell you, I got a job offer in London. And she grew up in a neighboring town, much bigger at 800 people. And she said, let's go see the world. And I said, really? You would give up a job here in Madison? And she goes, in a heartbeat. I can always find a new job. When are we going to get to travel the world?
I find it fascinating that you were able to just up and leave. And I know you said, well, I was from a small town. I mean, this is what you told me beforehand, that you were from a small town and hadn't experienced a lot of experiences. So of course I jumped on this and, thought it would be great. But I think there are a lot of people that are from a small town and that has brought them a lot of comfort, and being somewhere else is so unfamiliar and that is so scary. And I wish you could share with people like the perspective that you had that made you just feel totally comfortable and ready to do that. But do you even have that perspective, since maybe this is your only perspective?
Well, something you mentioned as we talked before we got on here was growing up in one place and kind of everybody staying there, which is great and which is fine. And that was similar to how I grew up. And I dreaded telling my parents. None of my family moved more than a few miles from home in their lives.
And that was the hardest thing for me, was having to tell my family that I was leaving. But I had to keep telling myself, like, I'm not leaving this planet. I'm just leaving this location, and I'm still available by phone, and I'm still available by a plane ride or a car ride. Like, we can still see each other and still have this relationship. But as I shared with you, once I was upset. I shouldn't say upset. I did cry before moving, because it was sad to leave the relationships I knew and the comfort that I knew. But once I did do it and I got there, I kept telling myself, like, I cannot believe I almost spent my entire life in the same place. I just couldn't. It was this weird feeling that my body was just like, wow, this is just a whole different way of living. People don't live the same everywhere you go. Yes, we're all humans, but it's pretty wild how a different state, different town, like there's just a different energy everywhere you go. People are just kind of living maybe with different intentions, I almost want to say. And I think that is a really great thing to experience during your human experience, as we were talking about it during this lifetime. But sorry, let's jump back into you going overseas and then starting your company.
I felt I would disappoint them by saying, I want to go work overseas. I would be the first to go do that. And so I broke it to them in stages. And one time when I lived half an hour from my parents, and I visited, we were home having dinner. And I said, there's this outside chance that there'll be a job that would fit for me over in London. And I'd already accepted the job, to be honest. And then a week later, I said, they actually want me to interview for it. And a week later, I said, they've offered me the job. And I was fishing, and I was breaking it to them in installments. And I was fishing to see how they'd react. And when I said, and they've offered me the job, and both my parents immediately said, they stunned me. They said, you should absolutely take it. And,
Wow.
and that is not what I thought they'd say.
Yeah.
And it staggered me. And I'm so proud of them
Yeah.
for saying, go take a chance, go see the world. And that emboldened me, I think, for the rest of my life in a way.
Well, that's a powerful thing to share because if we live our lives based on the reactions we think we are going to receive, we can really hinder our experience. And had you stopped yourself just because you thought for sure they're going to be upset or worried or whatever it be and just chose not to go, you wouldn't have gone. But then it turns out like that wasn't even the reaction. And I feel like in my own life too, so many times when I've gotten myself so worked up thinking that somebody's going to respond in a certain way, it ends up being the complete opposite. And it's really something I try to remind myself when I get worked up thinking that, oh no, they're going to say this or that, they're going to respond this way. I'm like, you know what? That's probably very much just in my own head, and just see what happens.
It takes so long in life to figure out that other people are not sitting around thinking about us and what we're doing as much as we think they are. And the
No.
quicker you learn that, the less you allow yourself to be guardrailed by that. So
Yeah.
let me fast forward to London. I was on a 2-year contract. My wife and I did not have kids at the time, and I'm on a 2-year contract. 6 months in, the date comes up, and we look at it and we go, we've been here for 25% of our time, and this is our chance to see the world. And in London, it was cold and rainy and damp, and technology was not what it is. It took 3 months for British Telecom to hook up a phone in our house. And so it was tough, and we were lonely. We had no friends or family. I love American sports. There's nothing on television. And I was the only American of 800 people in the facility. And so felt pretty isolated. And we're kind of down, and everything's different. Food,
Yeah.
traffic on a different side of the road. And we're kind of down. And my wife and I sat down and said, we need a new life strategy and a new approach to life. And so we sat down, maybe with a bottle of wine, and we came out with a new strategy. Instead of different is bad, different everything, we said different is good. And we adopted that life mantra. And man, that has been in my head. And I've used that life mantra, different is good, every time. And we had 18 months remaining, and we had no commitments, no family things to go to. So every weekend that came, we jumped in the car, jumped on the tube, the underground station, and we took advantage for 18 months and explored. It just shifted our lives and our perspective. So when we got to the end of the 2-year contract, they said, Jay, you can come back to Madison. We've got a new job for you, and kind of a promotion, and working with people I knew in an office of 1,300 people. And I had rented my house out. The landscaping I had done had grown up. And so it was easy to slide back in. Or you can take a job in Boulder, Colorado. And I'd never been west of the Mississippi in my life. And it was in a startup division with an unproven technology and only 12 people working there. And I did not know any of them, and I did not know the product. And so those were my choices: comfort and family and my own house and a job I know, or go somewhere foreign.
Yeah.
My new life mantra was
Different is
good.
good.
So it was an absolutely easy choice to go, let's go where we know nothing.
I love
And
it.
I'm so glad I did.
I love this, and I'm curious. I want to jump ahead, but then jump back. So when you were saying different is good, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this so prepared you for your life. Like you're saying, okay, now it obviously prepared you for this career change, but also that heart transplant. When that came along, I mean, we'll have to come back to that, but I can't help but think like, oh, that must have played into that too, where you were like, okay, when you had to accept that you were doing that, like, all right, this is different, very different, but it is good.
Well, you are spot on. Getting a heart transplant is living my brand.
Yeah,
And
living your brand for sure.
I adore uncertainty. And when in a restaurant, I typically go out, narrow my choices to 2 or 3, tell the wait person I'll have the pork chop or the gnocchi or the chicken arm, and you pick for me. Don't tell me, surprise me. I'll be happy with whatever. And so I enjoy uncertainty and lean into it.
Oh, wow. That's fun.
So I returned to the States and joined the small little division in Boulder, Colorado. And one of the guys in the Madison office said, Jay, why would you go there? There's tumbleweed blowing in the streets. It's
Yeah.
the West. And so I got to Boulder, and lo and behold, Boulder's unbelievably cool. It was kind of like Austin in Texas. Boulder is very fun and hip and cool. University of Colorado is here. And so Boulder was great. Came here and stayed in an international job, got to travel the world for 5 years, and my territory was everything outside the US. So very, very fun. And then a ways in, an engineer from outside our company said he was trying to get our company to license a medical device technology. And he showed it to our company, and I was the person to screen it and vet it and approve it or reject it. And I thought it was incredible. And so I went to our senior management and said, let's get on board with this technology and license it. And they said, no, we can't do that in the middle of the year, and it'll mess up our finances. And so I was in love with this engineering, the technology. And so I started, even though I'd been with my own company for 9.5 years, I thought, I want to go do this so badly, I'll go do it with him, and we'll raise money and we'll go do a startup outside my safe, comfortable big company. And that's what we planned. But the Midwesterner in me was so loyal, and I loved my boss. And I went to him and said, Joe, I got to tell you, I'm thinking of leaving because I love this technology so much. And if you won't fund it, I feel compelled to leave. So my boss and the company said, we appreciate your zeal for this technology, but financially, in the middle of a year, we're publicly held. We can't do that. And so have patience. And I said, yeah, but I don't have patience. And I got a book on how you can innovate. And it was called Entrepreneuring with an I, about 3M and how they hung on to an inventor who came up with sticky notes, which became $1 billion brand and success. And so I read that book, underlined things, dog-eared corners, and it showed how my company could do the same. Mm-hmm. So I gave that to my boss. I read it in 2 days, gave it to him, and he said, this is brilliant. And he flew to New Jersey for our corporate headquarters, showed the divisional president. He said, this is brilliant. He flew out the next day to meet with me. And he said, Jay, if we fund you, and we were asking for millions of dollars and so forth, if we fund you, how would this work? And I said, well, you need to let me go as an employee, hire me as a contractor, give me this, situation to succeed or fail. And he said, you've got 9.5 years in. If you get to 10 years, you're at a lifetime pension. Mm-hmm. And he asked, are you really ready to give up 9.5 years with this company and a lifetime pension that comes when you get to 10 years? Are you ready to do that, to go pursue this new technology in a startup in a different role? And I leaned forward and said, in a heartbeat. And he goes, that is the right answer. And so that's what I did. And wow. I left, and I and 2 engineers were no longer employees. We were contract, and we started a company. We are a division. We moved 2 miles down the road, had a 60,000 square foot warehouse, which is huge. It's room for 150 employees. And we were confident and we were bold that we would need that space.
That's when things are successful, though, right? When you told your boss, yeah, I'm going to give it up. Like when you believe in something that much, I feel like that's the story I hear time and time again with entrepreneurs. It's like they left something, but they knew they had to, because they knew they had this idea that was not something they could sit on any longer. And I think that's when you've got gold, is when it's like, I can't just sit on this. I've got to move with this idea.
Andrea, I'm getting goosebumps sitting here right now, thinking back to that moment, because I think many of us in life, those forks in the road come up, and call it intuition. I don't know what it is.
Can you talk on that a little bit, Jay? Because that's what I was thinking when I was saying that. And when you were sharing your piece, like there had to be this like intuition, this gut feeling, some sort of sense of knowing, this whole body yes that was happening in you that was saying like, do this. Like that's that intuition piece, right? You share, you tell me. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what you call it, but it was,
Okay.
I'm exploding and bursting with enthusiasm and excitement and not a nanosecond of disbelief. And this feels so right. And the universe has put this in front of me, and it's who I'm meant to be and
Yeah.
what I'm supposed to do next. And so it was unequivocal.
That is your intuition when you are feeling like you are exactly where you are meant to be. And it sounds like you felt very aligned with what you were doing. And so I think that had to be that intuitive guide from whatever people want to believe in, God, some sort of higher being. But there is this, like you said, it's a pivotal moment, right? But it came from somewhere. Where did it come from? And then you grabbing on and just having this sense of knowing this is going to be great. Where did that come from? Right? Like, obviously, your intelligence is a piece of it, but I think that path being laid before you and you knowing that it's a path to lean into, I think that comes from the intuition. But go ahead and keep sharing your story.
Triggered another story I've got to tell that I think relates because it's
Okay.
stuck in my head forever.
You have great stories.
It's called the shooting star story. When
Okay.
the medical device company, I was at an international sales conference in Italy, and each of us division marketing directors got a chance to stand up and promote the products from our company to get all the international salespeople to sell them. And I got up and talked about my products and why everybody should direct their people to sell the products from my group. And I thought I did a really good job because they could direct their people to sell whichever products they wanted. And I wanted them to get fully behind mine. And then one of my peers in another division, trying to compete for the time of the salespeople, said, "You should sell my product. Let me tell you a story." And he said, "In our lives, a shooting star may go over our heads only once or twice. And when it happens, a few things can happen. And one of those things is you're so busy in your life that you don't even notice the shooting star. The second thing that can happen is you look up and you see the shooting star, but you're too busy and you ignore it, even though you're aware of it. And the third thing you can do is pull out a grappling hook, a big hook on a rope, and take that hook and throw it up and latch that grappling hook into that star and ride it and go with it." And so that's what that intuition feels like for me. And that metaphor has stuck in my head. And so many times in life, when things come in front of me, I think there's a shooting star. What am I going to do? So I don't know if that relates to intuition, but I have a metaphor that actually comes into play.
Yeah. Well, I think it's still a beautiful story about how you can grab onto things or you can choose to look the other way. And I think a lot of times people look the other way because it is a little bit of work to grab on, right? And sometimes people don't want to put in the work. That's what I see so often in people that are struggling is it's the lack of desire to put in the work.
Today, we'll probably tend to share the stories that you latch onto the shooting star and it pulls you forward. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you throw the hook up and you latch on and it doesn't succeed. And that's okay too. You know, you learn lessons and even they can be a gift, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, the fast forward on that startup and leaving the company is we were very successful. We thought it'd take 18 months to get to market with a product. We did it in 12. We got sales up to $25 million. We grew from 3 people to 143 employees in 3 years. And that was a rocket ship.
Wow.
And so it was fun, scary, exciting. So that was a chapter that worked out well.
And you said you started a few companies. Do you want to share how you started another company?
After the medical device company and exiting from that, I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I thought I've got international experience, I've got startup experience, and I've got options. And so I found a headhunter, and she said, "You could have your pick of a lot of jobs. Tell me what you're thinking." And I described it, and I said, "There's this consulting firm in Boulder. Office is 5 minutes from home. I now have kids 2 and 7 years old. I want to coach Little League. I want to be a home for them. And so the concept of moving and leaving Boulder, which I grew to love, and having to travel a ton just no longer fit. And she said, I'm not even going to job search for you because I can tell you want to stay in Boulder, go work for that consulting firm. And they were doing stuff I liked. And so that's what I did. Mm-hmm. And I worked there 18 years. We grew from 12 people to 150, got to work on giant brands and do a lot of things and create new products and work on brands. And this is a downer, a little bit of a down story that shows they exist. There's a family crisis going on. I will appropriately not go into detail, but it really whacked me and my family and created risk. And I could no longer do my consulting job, of which I was a partner for 18 years in this company and helped grow it. So I was situationally depressed for like a year and a half, and I could no longer pick up the phone, present. I couldn't hear. I couldn't facilitate and brainstorm. And my partner said, dude, we love you. You've contributed so much, but we can't justify you being here anymore. And so that was a pivot. And that was not a throw the hook up and grab the star. That was a so what, now what moment. I told you this is another life mantra. And it's so life took a downturn and I had to figure out the now what. And I was in Boulder. I had connections at the university. I got a job as a business school professor at the University of Colorado. And I also, with a couple of partners from the consulting company, did a boutique consulting startup on the side and did consulting, and different than a medical device company, but did a consulting management, brand strategy, new product development consulting firm that turned out to, for a number of years, was quite successful.
Your story before that, you were saying how you got into this downer situation and that wasn't successful, but that was probably part of your success. It's good for people to piece all that together, right? And see, don't beat yourself up when something isn't a success, because that's your learning moment, because the success is still waiting for you. It is coming. So I thank you for sharing that part of the story, because sometimes people want to leave that stuff out and just like, oh yeah, here are all my wins. And it's like, no, let me hear your losses too.
Let me build on that, Andrea, because I agree wholeheartedly. Is my brother is wise, small town attorney, and who dispenses justice, and he's got a lot of wisdom. And he's always said, when one door closes, another opens. His wife was a cardiac nurse, ran a department, rehab department, and got into a dispute with the hospital over how they treated people, and they fired her. And after like 35-year stellar career, and I was talking to my brother, and my sister-in-law, the nurse, was swearing, which was not her, and she was really upset. He said, I just know when one door closes, another opens. And about a week later, the City of Madison Hospice organization, a very big organization that does a lot of good, called and said, Gail, we know about you. Would you come and be the executive director of our hospice organization? And so one door closed and she started a whole new career, which was incredible. Wow. So that story has stuck with me. When one door closes, what is the upside of loss? It's written in a book by Susan Cain called Bittersweet. And I've tried to train myself to search for what is the upside of loss, because there generally is one.
Yes, there always is. It's sometimes harder than some situations are definitely more difficult than others to see the upside, but there is one, as difficult as it can be at times. But Jay, can you start sharing your story, a little bit about your health journey and how you started having your cardiovascular struggles?
Yeah. So I grew up a high school athlete, and I was pretty healthy, and I like movement and fresh air in my face and wind, and on a bike and hiking and running and playing tennis. And so that's how I grew up my whole life. And things went well. I've described some really great things that happened. And so I had 4 decades of, I've got this thing and I can really influence and control life. But at some point you learn life is nonlinear. It doesn't just trend up, and nonlinear hard things will happen, and we're each going to get our dose, and they look different. And so I went from a lot of positive stuff to starting to not feel great. And I experienced pretty profound hearing loss that really interfered with my job. But I got lucky after about a decade of that. My ear, nose, throat doctor said, the cause of your loss is this little bone in your inner ear, the stapes bone, not free floating like it should. Too much calcium in the water supply as a kid made it attached to the bone in the inner ear. And he said, we could go in with surgery, break off that stapes bone, procedure's called a stapedectomy, and put in a titanium prosthetic stapes bone. Sounds high tech, doesn't it? And I'm going, hey, he said, but 3 chance of going deaf. And so it's like, I believe in statistics. That's 97% chance of hearing better. So I said, let's give it a go. So that's what we did. And I came home after surgery a day later and had people over. We're out on the back deck. And I heard every word of a conversation, every word. And I came in the house, and I can just about cry now. It's one of the greatest days of my life. I came in the house and I was getting a pitcher of water to take out. And I stood at the sink and cried with joy I knew another 40 years of my life was going to be different because I could now hear. When I'd lost it, I was no longer who I was. But part of it, again, was accepting some uncertainty and doing a procedure that had some risk, but it felt like the upside was so high, so significant.
What did you learn from losing something and then regaining it? Because for me, going through that process of dying, every single time that would happen, I would lose my vision. I would lose things where it's like the first thing that would come back is my hearing. So I could hear everybody, but I couldn't see anything. And so then it's like you really start to really appreciate all your senses when they're gone. So what did
The
you,
lesson,
what was the lesson?
don't take things for granted. Don't take life for granted. Don't take your relationships for granted. Don't take this day for granted. Don't take your hearing for granted. Don't take your job for granted, because just because you exercise and think you're living well, that's not how it works. The abundance of life is the good and the bad. And, and you're going to get your quota. Don't think you're going to get all ponies and rainbows. When you don't get the ponies and rainbows, so what? Wallow in it for a little bit, feel feelings. And now what? And what is it I'm going to do next? What are my options? What am I going to do?
Yeah. You're right. You're going to get your quota. That is true. We're all going to have our difficult moments, but it's what we do with those difficult moments that really shape our world. And that's what I'm trying to help people understand, is how they can choose how they shape their world. And that's why I'm sharing these stories. So I love all these things that you're sharing that you've gone through, so that people can gain a different perspective, whether or not they've lost their hearing or lost anything. But it's a perspective that we can take on and share with any event in our lives. So you lost your hearing, you got it back, and then what was the next part of your journey?
Well, I was a business school professor at the University of Colorado, and I kept having cardiac issues and losing energy and not being able to. I was a consistent runner and exerciser, and all of a sudden around age 50, I could no longer run, and I'd run 3 miles every other day for 30 years. And it was part of me, just that feeling and what it does for you and how you feel, and endorphins. And I could no longer do that. And I got testing done, cancer screening, bone screens, everything possible. And stress tests, would die on the treadmill. And I had a cardiac family history of things. My mother died of congestive heart failure, grandmother, aunts and uncles. And so I did all the testing, but they couldn't identify anything. But my stamina and energy kept going down, and it kept getting worse without being able to identify it and diagnose it. And then late 50s, I started, as I was teaching college students, I started having mini strokes called TIAs, trans ischemic attack. And I would black out in front of a classroom with 75 students and not fall out, not faint, not fall on the floor, but just my brain would go blank. And it's a tiny blood clot going to the brain. You're sort of semi-conscious, and I'd not know who these people were in front of me. I'd look at my slides projected on the wall, not know what they were, not have any context for where I was. And maybe it'd be 2-3 minutes. I would come out of that disoriented, but ultimately come back and connected and conscious. Students would say, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'd go, yeah. Finish the lecture, finish a couple more lectures, stumble home at the end of the day. And that happened a few times. Went to a doctor, but I was having shoulder pain. I was playing too much tennis. I had a torn rotator cuff, bone impingement in my shoulder. It hurt so bad that camouflaged the mini strokes I was having. And the doctor and I focused on shoulder pain. So I went to a primary care doc, but we were distracted by the shoulder pain and did not identify the cardiac issues. And I should have been on blood thinners, but we did not collaborate and figure that out. And so a few weeks later, at a friend's house watching a football game, sitting on the couch, the room went black, it closed in. I had a full-on stroke, and your vision goes, it's cloudy and dark, your speech slows down, and I wasn't capable of understanding the symptoms. The friends I was with did not know the symptoms of stroke. They are, for our listeners, FAST, fast. Ask anybody who's had an incident, can they smile? If they cannot smile and it's distorted, that's a sign of a stroke. Arms, can they lift their arms? If they cannot, that's a sign of a stroke. Speech, ask them simple questions. If they're slowed down and mumbling, that's a sign of a stroke. The T is for time. You've got 2 to 3 hours to get to the hospital. There are reversal drugs for a stroke that can reverse what's happening. We did not make that happen. I did not. And so I had to feel the effects of that stroke full on.
Wow.
The effects of the stroke were I lost most of my memory for 6 to 9 months. And I was out of work for 18 months. I could not drive, couldn't balance a checkbook. Functions of the brain that filter light were gone. And so any amount of light, even in a dark movie theater, I had to wear dark sunglasses because any tiny amount of light was blinding and painful to me. And so I had 6 months. I had to stay with my girlfriend and partner, and she took care of me. And it took a long time to recover. But the silver lining, the upside of all this, I've learned to find it, was an occupational therapist came to my home and told me, in helping me just get around the house, said, there's a thing called neuroplasticity, and you can rewire your brain. They used to think your brain's hardwired and it couldn't recover from something like a stroke, but now they know it can. And signals happen in your brain, and the pathways and neural networks they go on, some of them are dead from where the blood clot hit, but there are many, many neural pathways, and those signals can find new pathways, just like water finds a new path. And so I learned about that, studied it a bit, and I started doing 2 to 3 hours of brain rewiring every day. And to me, I don't know that my understanding is perfect, but it worked for me. And I would try and make my brain deal with lots of stimuli. And for example, I'd go for an hour hike. I'm in Colorado, find a trail with tree roots and rocks you can trip over and light filtering through trees where you're blinded. And I would send my brain so many signals, it would have to find new pathways. And I'm a competitive tennis player. I wanted to play tennis again, but I was a shell of myself. And so I knew I needed to improve. I couldn't improve my vision. It will never improve, but I could improve my hand-eye coordination and my balance. I bought a big red bouncy ball you use for dodgeball or kickball. And I'd go in the garage. It was winter. To get my hand-eye coordination and improve my vision, I bought a big red bouncy ball like you use for kickball or dodgeball at grade school. And I'd go in the garage and throw it against the wall 1,000 times, high and low and right and left, just to force my brain to have to deal with all those signals. And for my memory, I couldn't remember relatives. I couldn't remember people. And I couldn't remember my own lectures. I wanted to get back to teaching sometime. And so a traumatic brain injury, I learned many of those memories are still stored in the geography of the brain. There's these little nooks and crannies. and the memories are in there, but like a file drawer, you need to open the file drawer and look in there and refresh yourself. So
Mhm.
I'd go through my camera roll, I'd go through photo albums, I'd go through my old lectures, I'd get mentored on my own lectures that I'd written a year before. I'd have somebody come and tell me what the content was. And so I restored, I
Wow.
restored my memory, and I went back to teaching in 18 months. I went back too early. My
Yeah.
brain was probably at about 75%, my cognition. And so I struggled. I taught for a decade, but it led to some problems because certain things like financial analysis and certain analytical stuff, my brain was and is no longer capable of doing that.
Mhm.
And so it's a disability from a traumatic brain injury. And I probably
Mhm.
got back all I could, but there was a limit to it. And that was hard. That was hard because after 9 years, they said, Jay, we're not renewing your contract. And so that hurt. That really stung to have that happen. But another door opened.
Yeah.
Uh,
Your story is something I talk about a lot, how people will often say it is what it is. I feel like you hear that statement a lot from people that are struggling. They just shrug their shoulders and like it just is what it is. And you so easily could have said that in your situation. So easily. But instead, you were like, let me look into this and see if it really is what it is, which never really is.
yeah.
But you looked into it and how you could change things and just tried it. And, when it comes to brain rewiring, I feel like there are multiple ways to do it. And it's the same for a lot of things. Everyone will not be successful at it in the same exact way. And so it's important to learn how to do it in different ways. And I love how you did it. And you were saying it's almost like you just put yourself in these stressful situations, but safe, but stressful, right? Like you knew you were safe, but also you knew it was going to be a little bit stressful on your brain and a little bit overwhelming. But once you pushed through all that, you have made some leaps and bounds with your brain. So I think it's really amazing how you took all that on.
Over the years, I've studied hope and resilience a lot
Mhm.
because it's crucial to my situation. And one of the definitions for hope that I love is belief that a better outcome is possible, even in
Mhm.
the face of extreme adversity. I've tried to cling on and hang on to, I believe there's a better outcome. And in the face of some pretty tough situations. And that's kept me searching and kept me curious. The magnitude of my traumatic brain injury, I got back as much as I could. And it was great in relational things and people interactions, but not for analytical things. My brain could
Mhm.
no longer do things it had before. And there was a silver lining. I was 66 and I could have said, financially, I'm in good shape and I didn't need to find a new revenue stream. And so I was in good shape, but I'm curious and I'm still a work in process. So I wanted to keep going. And so I did two things. One is I had a friend who went into life coaching, and life coaching is incredibly popular. Everybody and their
Yeah.
brother life coach these days. And so I thought getting income and more about an interesting way, a way to meet interesting people and have intimate and vulnerable conversations. And I care less if I make much money from it. And
Mhm.
so I got trained, started my life coaching practice. And meantime, somebody referred me to another medical device startup and
Mhm.
said, you might click with the founder, who was a very eclectic, visionary, crazy guy. And so I talked to him and he said, come do a little work for me. And so I started doing a little work for him and he liked me. I liked him. I loved what they were doing. It was a therapy bike you could do at home after cardiac surgery or knee surgery. And instead of having to go to a physical therapist, you could do it from home with a telescreen like a Peloton bike, except your clinical specialist sees you in your home. So I thought, and so let's throw the hook up and grab
Mhm.
in. So I started consulting with him and doing life coaching. And here I got bounced out of being a business professor, which I loved. I loved, and it was my identity, and it stung. And in 6 months, I'm a life coach and I'm in a startup for this medical device part-time. And I got done at the university, and the founder of this startup, medical device startup, says, I want you to come and work full-time and be my general manager. And I said, I got health issues. My health is declining. I don't need to do it. And he said, I won't take no for an answer. And he said, we're going to change the world. And so, of course, the answer was, let's go. And so I did that for a couple of years and doing life coaching at the same time. And eventually, my health valve replacement would knock me down for a while. And then my heart failure got worse. And the company, the startup I was in, moved to Brookfield, Connecticut, and they wanted me to join out there. And I said, I'm excited. I'd love to. No, I can't do it. And so I was smart enough to bail.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Doesn't sound like you, though, because from everything you've shared, oh, different is good, this and that. But it sounds like you realize too, though, we have limits. We're human. We have limits.
Andrea, I work with a therapist, and mainly because it's 100% covered by Medicare, and I find it fun, but it's helpful, very helpful too. And with the therapist, I describe where I'm at in life, and particularly after a heart transplant. And I described things, and I said, I don't know that I really need you. What would we work on? And he says, acceptance, dude. Your blind spot. I said, what's my blind spot? And he said, your blind spot is you are the adventurer. You are the enthusiast. You have these grandiose visions, and you want to always keep doing more, even in the face of it being unhealthy for you. And so he says, you got to work on acceptance, and you can still do great things, and you can still be a work in process and learn, but you need to have some level of he says, you don't need, I would encourage you to have some level of acceptance and modify just a bit, the pursuits you take on.
I think so many people are going to relate to what you just said. So many people. So thank you for sharing that.
It's taken so long. It takes so many lessons and so many times of adversity. And, ultimately here, we're going to get to talk about the transplant.
Yeah.
Let's
get there.
So, we'll talk about it. So my heart failure is declining. I'm having more procedures. I'm more compromised. I've got to take 2 or 3 hour naps a day, and I'm struggling to walk my dog that I love to the end of the block. And sometimes 5 or 6 times I get up, I get to the back door, and I say, this was, 18 months ago. And I'd say, I just don't have the energy, and I got to go lay down for half an hour. And that is not who I am, but that's who I was in that chapter. And so I was signed up for a shortened runway. My heart failure doctor of a decade said, Jay, you're getting closer to needing a transplant. I said, thanks, but no thanks. I've led a great life. I've been ungodly lucky, just amazingly blessed, and all the things I've got to do and the fun I've had. And I don't want to drag my girlfriend and my family and my kids and everybody and myself through the rigors of a heart transplant and the meds and the side effects and the risk that comes with it and the stress. And for those 2 months or 2 years, I knew, I can't deny the situation I was in health-wise with advancing heart failure. And so I did a lot of research on the afterlife and the spirit world and what happens. And I came up with a clear vision. I'm going to become a spirit guide, and I'll be around a few thousand years, and I'll onboard and mentor and shepherd people to the spirit world. And I'll be able to time travel and teleport. It's going to be awesome. And I'll be able to communicate telepathically with my kids, and I'll be able to observe their lives. And I shared all this with them. And so I was great with the alternative of no heart transplant. And I label things. I called that chapter the slow wind down. I'll gently wind down and fall asleep, and I'll move on to the next gig. It's an exciting gig. And the transplant gig, I labeled roll the dice. And that looked hard with risk. My doctor said the slow wind down, I think you've mislabeled it. Your heart failure is pretty extreme, and it's going to be pretty tough, and you're going to be hospitalized, and it won't be pretty. And so he said, boy, I really encourage you to get this transplant because your heart failure is going down faster than you thought. And I'd known him a decade. We were very honest with each other. And he says, Jay, it's time to shit or get off the pot. So my doctor said, you've got 3 days to decide on a heart transplant and need to decide by Monday. And so I tried my business analysis techniques, lists of pros and cons and statistics and analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I tried another technique to get to a decision, which was I was taught try decisions on as if you made them and feel them and walk around the room with them and just see how it strikes you. And so I tried on the slow wind down, and I thought I could be stoic, watch me. I can be a role model for others. I can not have health anxiety, and I can really be a model for how to deal with choosing to accept it. I thought I can be stoic and accept not getting a transplant, and I thought I'll walk around the room and see how that feels. And it felt not fun and not exciting and like a downer. And that's, I thought I can do it and I can be an example, but not very invigorating for me. And then I thought, okay, let's try on roll the dice. Take this adventure, sign up to join a club that only 3,500 people a year get in. You can't buy your way in. And there's only 30-some thousand people in America in this club. And I'll be in this tribe and we'll have this bond like nobody else. And B.B. King, the great blues singer, had a saying that has stuck with me. You cannot sing the blues unless you pay your dues. And I thought, this will be paying your dues to go through a heart transplant. It'll be an amazing adventure, all the uncertainty I could wish for. And it will be an epic ride, and it'll be such profound stimulation, and it'll take me to a new place. I don't even know where it will take me, but I'm ready for it, and let's bring it on. And if it doesn't happen, if I die in the surgery, so what? Door number one is I get to become a spirit guide and the world. Or door number two is things fade to black. So what? Or door number three is I wake up, my chest hurts, and I'm taking a bunch of pills, and I'll have all this unbelievable stimulation and hallucinate probably and see some visions and get to do something. I want to be in a lot of clubs in my life, and this will be a club that's pretty hard to get into.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how you can move from one choice to the other, how you were like, okay, I'm just going to be done. But then you figured, okay, let me look at some different methods and how can I really walk through this in my own brain and figure out, like, is this the best decision that I'm making? And then change your mind. Because I mean, that's a really big decision to make, and then to even change your mind on it.
I did not appropriately finish the story, which was trying on a coat of clothes, which is when I tried on the roll of the dice and thought about the adventure and the uncertainty and new tribe and profound stimulation. The feeling I got from roll the dice was all this excitement for getting to do something I'd never done. And immediately, my nature when I tackle something like this, like the startup, medical device startup, and just it was so apparent to me, the intuition was there, that it felt so right. And I immediately wanted to start writing an action plan. Like when I start a new job, I'll go first 90 days. What am I going to do in the first 90 days? And so that's what I did. As I get a heart transplant, what's my 90-day plan? What am I going to do and how am I going to recover? What will I do? And so I get so excited about that option. When I tried on that coat of clothes, I started writing an action list for what I'm going to do post-transplant.
Yeah. You really embraced different is good. You really embraced your motto for sure. What was the biggest thing that you took away from this experience? I mean, a heart transplant is a huge, huge experience. There's got to be a life lesson you looked back on after and took away from that.
It was. I'll summarize. I am 1 year post-transplant. So I've got 12 months and 85% of people survive the first 12 months. So check that one off. It's really hard the first week after transplant. You're on massive doses of steroids and immunosuppressants and meds. Your body just went through enormous trauma. You have delusions and delirium. And I did. And I had 3 or 4 days where a family member had to hold my hand and stroke my arm and say, you're safe, you're going to live, because each night I didn't think I would. And I had practiced meditative breathing and mind control and all this out the window when you're on massive doses of drugs and you don't have your brain power. You lost your superpower. But I got through that first week and it got better week by week. And there's a lot of side effects and symptoms, and cutting through all that, you get through them. I get through them. And what is the transformative life lesson was your question. And you realize how precious life is. And you are so grateful for the people around you. You're grateful for each day. I took a course once in Coursera, online education from the University of Yale Philosophy Department. It's called The Science of Happiness. 4 million people took it that semester with me. And the thing that stuck in my head is it taught us how to savor. And how do you savor in life? I've learned to dial up my savoring, and I savor my dog walk. I savor making lunch. I savor a movie. I savor going out for a meal. Life is so precious, and I probably took it a lot more for granted.
It is. And it's one of those things where I think it is really, really hard for people to not take life for granted until you've had a piece of it taken from you. And I can understand that. I totally get it. It's so hard if you're not actually going through something very traumatic like you and I have gone through. It is hard. I mean, you can say it, but you don't really feel the emotion of it. Like, oh, I love my life. I'm so grateful and I'm so appreciative of this, that, and everything. But when it's actually really physically gone, there's a difference, and you feel it very differently than just imagining it. And so it is helpful, I think, though, the more people talk about it and share and just push that reminder out there. So I'm really grateful you shared your
I'd love
story.
to, Andrea, share one more.
Okay.
I'd love to share one more lesson learned, and I want to see how much it resonates with you on kind of a transformation or life lesson, which is around empathy. And as I said, I had so many years, I had a great childhood, and I grew up where we were trained, you sort of make your own luck in life, and that the harder you work, the more luck you will have. But as I got older and more hard chapters came and adversity, I have a gene mutation, which led to all the cardiomyopathy, and I had no control over that. But first off, we're born in America and we're blessed in so many ways. And a lot of people are blessed all around the world, but there are a lot of people who are not. And I don't think I had anywhere near the empathy I could and should have had for people who their adversity was more extreme and their adversity came much earlier. And my empathy for fellow travelers on the planet is so dialed up that you get what you get. And so with all the things I've had, I've had some, but I feel so fortunate for the path I've had. And I have extreme empathy. And when I see people with difficulties, I have so much more empathy than I ever did before.
No, that is definitely something I can resonate with. I've always been a big empath growing up. I mean, as you know, I have these intuitive gifts, and I can very much feel into other people's feelings and emotions. And I think that this goes into something else I'm not going to get into, but like as a child, I very much, I think, struggled sometimes in very busy spaces because I could just feel everybody's feelings and emotions. And that was a lot for me. But yes, after I started having all these very serious health struggles, I started thinking like, oh my gosh, like how sad would it be if somebody doesn't love me because I have da 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 going on with me, and how sad is it if I don't love somebody if they have this or that, like, and so it just really brought acceptance into the forefront of my mind constantly, and to not have judgment, especially because I was young. I was 21 when I got my pacemaker put in and all that, and then got all these other health problems, and I was young and dating and all that. And there's a lot of judgment when people are dating. It's worse now than ever. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It definitely made me even more empathetic and really brought acceptance to the forefront of my life for sure.
I'm writing a book, which is a collection of heart transplant stories and, money to be given to a charity for organ donation. And one of the people who shared their story in her book, she called it the invisible disability. And there are some disabilities that we have that are physically, visually seen by other people.
Yeah.
But there are many disabilities, mental health or heart disease or
sure.
cancer, where it's not visible. And the world is often harsh and not very empathetic to people who have an invisible disability. And so, having read that, it's triggered me to be much more aware of somebody who cuts you off in traffic or whatever it might be. I played tennis with somebody a few years ago who they were kind of annoying to play with. They would tell you where to go on the court and they'd be critical of how you were playing. And I thought they are really a pain to play with. And then somebody told me, Jay, were you aware that that individual has a level of autism that really impacts them and they have no control over how they interact with you or other people? And it just shifted my thinking to think, how judgmental was I? And so I try to train myself to be much more aware of that.
Yeah. No, I could go on for days, stories like that. I had a similar situation with myself where I was freshly out of the hospital with ulcerative colitis, and I'd been home for quite a while and finally felt up to leaving the house. So I left with my mom, but I couldn't walk really because a lot of physical stuff going on. And so we went to Home Depot and I just sat at the front by the magazine racks, and this guy came up to me. He wanted something that was like near me and said something super rude to me about just sitting and being in the way. And I just kind of looked at him with probably like sad puppy dog eyes and was just like, okay, sorry. But it's like, I was not intentionally trying to be in anybody's way. I actually tried to place myself somewhat out of the way, but like I couldn't just physically jump up and be walking and staying out of people's way. And so I was doing the best I could. But it's like you're saying, I've been cut off in traffic and I'm like, you know what? There's something else on their mind right now besides driving. I don't know what it is, but yeah. So have grace.
And from that situation, Andrea, what did you learn?
Well, I already had learned it, I feel like, but even more so, I had learned to just have patience. But this was something I'd always done, but even more so was to put myself in someone else's shoes always. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Is there a way people can connect with you if they would like to?
I am near publishing a book. I'm near launching a podcast. Probably my name, Jay Waddell, 2221 at gmail.com. I
Okay.
thoroughly
Thank
enjoyed
you.
being on your show and chatting today.
Yes, thank you so much.